Good morning, church family. I'd like to welcome you back into my home and thank you for welcoming me into your homes. Now, obviously, things in our world have not returned to normal, otherwise we'd be doing this sermon in person and not over video. But there is one way in which we are going to go back to what's normal for us today. Today we're going to resume our sermon series on the book of Genesis. And we're going back to Genesis for a couple reasons. First of all, we don't want to let this virus completely derail us. We took a pause from our regular series for a little while to reflect very intentionally on what we're going through with the coronavirus, and then also for Easter, both of which are very important things to do. But we don't want to let this stop us forever. We've been going through Genesis for a long time. We started all the way back in November 2017. Yeah, Genesis is a long book, and it would be a shame to not complete such a long and wonderful journey. But then also, it's not as if as we go to Genesis, we have to stop talking about the coronavirus, about all the things going on around us. We don't have to forget about it all. The book of Genesis was not written to address the coronavirus. None of the Bible was. But all of Scripture was written to be applied. We're not meant to study any of it in abstract, but take it and apply it to our context, to our world. So as we go back to what we were doing before, it's not as if we have to forget about our current reality. Instead, we're going to take Genesis and see how it speaks into what we are going through. Let's start with the children's message. Sometimes, boys and girls, sometimes in life, we face a problem so big, we have no idea how to fix it. Like this virus that we're all going through. How is this going to end? When is it going to be over? How will we fix this so that we can go back out to see our friends, to see our family, to see our church family? Do you know? I don't know how to fix this. I can't even imagine how to fix that. And isn't that a little bit scary when even the grown-ups don't know what the answer is? Well, when you face a really big problem, a problem so big you can't imagine how to solve it, here's what you need to remember. The biggest problem the world has ever faced is sin. How can people who do and think and want bad things be with a God who's perfectly good? That's a problem bigger than any virus. And for thousands of years, nobody had any idea how to fix it. People couldn't even dream of a solution, not even the grown-ups. But then one day, God did something incredible, something too good for us to dream of it. He sent his son Jesus to live and to die for us, so that when we trust him, we are forgiven and God sees us as being as perfectly good as Jesus was. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that wonderful? Because of what Jesus did, we can now be part of God's family. And we actually just celebrated this at Easter. The story of Easter is the story of God solving the biggest problem the world has ever known, a problem so big we couldn't even imagine how it could ever be fixed. So whenever a problem seems too big for you, too big even for the grown-ups, and you have no idea what to do, just remember, it's not too big for God. He knows what to do. Even if you don't know, he does. And isn't that really good news? Okay, well, it was very good talking to all of you, but now it's time for the adult message. Imagine you're alone, lost in a desert. You're desperately thirsty and completely out of energy. You couldn't take another step. All around you, as far as you can see, there's nothing but desolate sand, and there isn't even a hint of rain in the sky. It's completely cloudless. In such a situation, it would be hard to imagine any way of surviving. Things seem hopeless. But then you see something on the horizon, something dark and glistening, and it's moving towards you. At first you think maybe it's a vehicle, an SUV or something. But as it gets closer and closer, you can tell, no, that's not what it is. It's coming towards you, snaking across the desert. And as it gets close enough, you realize what it is. It's water. It's water. Soon, you are in the middle of a shallow stream. You fall down to your knees and you drink. Now, this scenario, it might sound impossible. This is fantasy. But it's not. Many deserts are bordered by mountains. And when it rains in the mountains, the rain gets channeled down into valleys and then funneled out into the desert. And that water can run across the desert, sometimes for hundreds of kilometers, causing streams to pop out of nowhere. It's not even that rare of an occurrence. Completely natural. The only thing that's at all miraculous in this scenario is the timing. The water happening to come along right at the proper moment. Well, what's this point of this meteorological and geological lesson? Especially when it would actually take a miracle to get most of us out into a desert in the first place. Well, the point is, the natural world alone is capable of doing things that go beyond what we can imagine. We can imagine someone coming along in a Jeep. We'd hope for that, but we would never dream of, never hope for a stream to come and find us. Yet it could happen. Well, if the natural world is able to go beyond what we can conceive of, what we can imagine, how much further can God go? The truth is, we have very limited imaginations. We can't even wrap our head around everything that already happens in our world. We certainly can't wrap our heads around what an infinitely powerful and wise God can do, a God who controls all of time and space. Once you start to factor God into reality, the possibilities in this world are limitless. God can do infinitely more than we can dream of. To paraphrase Ephesians 3:20, God is able to do immeasurably more than we can imagine. That's our big idea for today, and that's what we see here in Genesis 45, as we see people who receive blessings from God that go beyond anything they could have dreamed of, that they dared to hope for. And this is a lesson we can take and apply to our lives at all times, but it's an especially timely message right now as we are facing very big problems with solutions that we can't even dream of. It's very good news right now to know that God can do immeasurably more than we can imagine. Let's jump into our passage, looking what's going on, but also trying to put ourselves in the different characters' shoes, trying to understand what they would be thinking, imagining, hoping for, and fearing in all of the events going on. First, there's Joseph. Years ago, Joseph was sold into slavery by all of his brothers except for Benjamin. After many, many hard years down in Egypt, he's risen up to the position of governor. He has tremendous power, and his brothers who are down in Egypt are now in his power. He has control over them, and on top of that, they don't even know who he is. He's concealed his identity from them. Well, what is he hoping will happen? What is he imagining will take place? For some time now, he's been setting things up so that he can be with Benjamin without having to see his other brothers again. He'll pretend to take Benjamin as his slave, send the other brothers away. He and Benjamin can be reunited and live together, and he never has to see the brothers who betrayed him again. And that's what he's been setting things up for. That's what he's been angling towards. And since he has a lot of power, he probably imagines this has a good chance of coming true. Then there are the brothers. What's running through their heads? Well, probably a lot of fear. The governor of Egypt, for reasons they don't understand, has been messing with them for some time right now. He has all the power. He's been threatening to keep one of them as a slave. He could easily keep all of them as slaves, or do worse. For them, they're probably just hoping to go home, maybe with a bit of grain since they're in the middle of a famine and that's why they came down to Egypt in the first place. Just going home would seem like a dream come true for them, and a dream that probably doesn't seem very likely at this moment. And then finally we have Jacob, their father, who's back at home in the Promised Land. What's running through his head? Well, there seems to be very clear worst case and best case scenarios for him. The worst case scenario is that none of his sons come back home, which would also be quite tragic because that would mean they wouldn't be able to bring any food and there would be starvation. You can tell he's very afraid of losing them, which is why he didn't want them to go down to Egypt in the first place, but you can also tell he's very afraid of starvation, which is why he relented and agreed to let them go. And so for him, the best case scenario would probably be 11 of his 12 sons returning with some food. And I say 11 of 12 because his 12th son, Joseph, has been thought to be dead for quite some time now. For many years, Jacob has believed that Joseph is dead, so it's extremely unlikely that he would be imagining Joseph returning to him. That's what's running through everyone's heads at the moment, probably. What would be going through our heads, I think, if we were in their positions? The things we'd be imagining, hoping for, fearing. And what we see here when we look at all of that are some pretty bleak possibilities, some pretty negative things that they're imagining, but then also some fairly limited hopes and dreams. For many of them, their desires aren't actually all that high. Let's pause and step away from our passage for a minute now to think about our own expectations as we go through our own crisis. What are we imagining that's going to happen in our world, especially, as we go through and then come to the end of the coronavirus pandemic? There's probably a lot of dread, a lot of worst case scenarios running through our heads. It's easy to imagine so many things not going so well. For instance, there's the economy. And what's the economy going to be like after this is all over? So many people have already lost jobs. I know some of you have been laid off. Our RRSPs aren't looking all that good. It's especially serious if you're drawing near to retirement. And there's a lot of talk of there being a recession if we're not already in one. Well, some of you are thinking about starting your careers. It's a pretty scary thing to think about starting a career in a recession. So there's going to be a lot of economic fears out there. It's easy to imagine things not being so good in the future. And then there's, our country and our city as a whole. Canada is a pretty amazing country, a great country to live in, and Toronto is a wonderful, vibrant city filled with life. Well, are those things going to be true after this is all over? Or, will our country and our city change in negative ways? Will things not be the same? And then also there's the church, which, I, for one, as a pastor, think about a lot. I think about our church. I think about churches in general in our city and in our country. How is this going to affect our churches? When all of this is over, is everyone going to come back? Or there are some people that are going to, just not return? And economically, are our churches going to be able to weather these hardships? Or is this going to shut some churches down? It's pretty easy to imagine this happening. In these areas and so many others, it's very easy to picture worst case scenarios, to dream all sorts of dreams that are really, nightmares. And because of that, the idea of things just going back to normal, that has to seem pretty good right now. That's probably what we're hoping for. That's probably what we're dreaming of in so many areas. And it's probably a dream that seems pretty far-fetched. How do things just go back to normal after everything that's happened? This is such a big moment that we are living through such a disruptive time. How do things go back to normal? And I'm not saying that normalcy wouldn't be something to be thankful for. So many of us have so much that for things to just return to normal, that would be a blessing. We should be thankful if that happens. But I am pointing out that normalcy isn't actually that big of a dream. It doesn't show a lot of imagination. It's not a huge thing to hope for, especially when you're skeptical that it can even happen. For a lot of us right now, it's as if we are alone out in a desert and things look pretty hopeless. It's hard to imagine, surviving this, that we're going to get out of this in one piece. Now that we've talked about expectations in our passage and in our own lives, let's go back to our text and see what actually happens. Let's see what God does in these people's lives. In the chapter previous to this, in Genesis 44, something happens which now changes everything. In a display of Christ-like love and self-sacrifice, Judah offers to take the place of his younger brother Benjamin, becoming a slave so that his brother can go free. This act of compassion and love is so profound, so moving, that it causes an emotional tidal wave in Joseph. He finds himself breaking down. Previously, he had been scheming to keep Benjamin while not having to see his other brothers. But now he finds himself reconciling with all of them, forgiving them, throwing himself upon them, kissing them, and crying. And he's actually joyful about it. He didn't want anything to do with them before, but now he's so glad for this moment. And on top of that, he has this moment of profound realization about God and about his own life. He says to his brothers, "God sent me before you to preserve life." Suddenly everything comes into focus for him. He realizes that everything he's been through, the hardship, the suffering, it hasn't been random, it hasn't been meaningless, but rather it's been part of a good plan, God's good plan, in order to save Joseph's family, to save so much of the known world from starvation by sending him down to Egypt and positioning him where he can make a difference. And then with the brothers, they're coming into all of this just hoping to survive and thinking that they might not. But now, not only is the governor of Egypt not threatening to harm them, but it turns out he is their long-lost brother, the brother they betrayed, but he's forgiving them, lifting off of their shoulders this tremendous weight of guilt that's been weighing them down for years. And then on top of that, he offers to let them come and live with him down in Egypt, where he will be able to protect them and provide for them and get them through this famine. And then there's Jacob back home, and he's going to get what he wants. All 11 of his sons who went down to Egypt, they're going to return, and they're going to return with food, but then Jacob is also going to receive so much more. He's going to be told that his 12th son, Joseph, who he thought for years and years was dead. He thought he would never see him again. Well, Joseph is alive. He's actually doing pretty well. He's the governor of Egypt, and he wants Jacob to come down and live with him, and he's going to take care of the whole family. It's news so great that at first Jacob can't believe it, but then as the reality sinks in, he says something. He says, "It is enough." And those words say so much. For a father who thought his son was gone, who thought his son was dead, to get him back, that is truly enough. He was afraid he was going to lose yet another son, maybe all of his sons, and he gets his long-lost son back. When we look at Joseph, when we look at his brothers, when we look at Jacob, we don't see their wildest dreams come true. No, far from it. Instead, we see God doing things in their lives that they never would have dreamed possible. Blessings that go beyond anything they could have imagined, anything we would imagine in their place, but things which are fully possible for God. What we see in Genesis 45, what we see in the lives of these people, is that God can do immeasurably more than we can imagine. What's God going to do in our lives, in our world? Well, the short answer is I don't know. He hasn't told me, so I can't promise anything. But then also beyond that, my imagination is just as limited as yours. I have no idea what's possible, let alone what's going to happen. But that's okay. I don't need to be able to picture it. I don't have to wrap my head around it. God can do more than I can even dream of. Can God get us through all of this financially? Is it possible we could even come out of this in a better place where we're actually able even to help other people? Yes, that's possible. It can happen. Now, what would that look like? What would that take? What's that pathway look like? I don't know. But I don't have to know. God knows what He's doing, and He can do whatever He wills. Could our country, our city, come out of this in a better place? Could Canada be a better country to live in? Could Toronto be a more vibrant city? Could our society be more just, more righteous? Absolutely, that's possible. Now, how could that happen? What would that look like? What would that take? I don't know. I can't picture it, but I don't have to. God can do whatever He wills, whether I can understand it, whether I can anticipate it or not. And as for our churches, could we come out of this, not just surviving, but being revived? Revival not just in terms of church numbers, in terms of the amount of people who come back, but also revived in terms of the depth of our spirituality, the quality of our walk with God. Absolutely. Now, what would that look like? What would that take? I may have some ideas, but I don't fully know. I don't fully know, but I don't need to. God knows. God knows what we need. He knows what it will take to revive His church. I can't imagine what God is going to do in all of this, in this crisis, through this crisis, not because He's limited, but because I'm limited, because my imagination is limited. It can't stretch as far as the will of God can go. And the best example of this is the cross. No one would have dreamt up the Easter story, the idea of God coming to earth, living and dying in His people's place. That was inconceivable. To us, at least, but not to God. God came up with that idea, and then He made it a reality. We are invited through the story of Jacob, Joseph, and his brothers, and most significantly through the story of Jesus, to live with unlimited, boundless hope that stretches beyond anything we could dream up ourselves, because God is able to do immeasurably more than we can imagine. It may seem right now like we're in a desert with no water in sight, but God can cause streams of water to flow out of nowhere. So let's wait with hope and see what He's going to do.